A veteran saw the danger before anyone else did. On a freezing Seattle night, outside a dim convenience store, a young boy stood trapped between two men whose intentions were written in their stance. Ethan Walker, 32 years old, a worn former Navy SEAL drifting through the winter with his German Shepherd Shadow, didn't hesitate. He moved fast, signaling Shadow as snow whipped across the pavement. The second gunshot cracked the icy air. Brick fragments tore across Ethan's face. His left eye dimmed into darkness before his body hit the ground. By the time the bikers arrived, sirens were already closing in. Ethan didn't know the boy was the son of a Hells Angels member, and he didn't know that losing an eye would lead him to the first family he had found in years. That day had begun like every day he'd lived alone, cold, hungry, and invisible. But when he saw that child in danger, something in him refused to stay silent. The shot that broke the winter silence in Seattle. Winter pressed against Seattle like a silent tide, cold and steady beneath a sky the color of steel. Ethan Walker moved through the frost-covered streets with the kind of quiet that comes from long years of training. At 32, he carried the marks of a man shaped by both discipline and loss. His frame was tall and lean, shoulders squared even beneath his worn Navy jacket. A jagged scar traced the edge of his jaw, a remnant from a desert night years earlier when a mission went wrong and 3 friends never came home. His dark blonde hair was trimmed short in the manner of men who struggle to let go of old habits. His eyes, a deep gray, carried the watchfulness of someone who still measured every doorway, every corner, every stranger. Ethan had been a Navy SEAL for nearly a decade before a blast injury forced his early discharge. Since then, he had drifted from town to town, trying to outrun memories that followed him like cold breath on his neck. Beside him walked Shadow, a 4-year-old German Shepherd with a thick black and tan coat and a calm, steady gait. Shadow had served with Ethan in the military and bore his own invisible wounds. His right ear bent slightly from a shard of shrapnel years earlier, giving him a perpetual look of cautious curiosity. He was loyal to a fault, alert to every sound, and protective of Ethan in the way only a dog who has shared danger can be. People often stepped aside when Shadow passed. He looked like a creature carved from resolve itself. Seattle's winter streets were half empty that night, lights dim behind hazy glass, the air trembling with falling snow. Ethan had been sleeping in a temporary shelter near the waterfront, but restless memories had driven him outside. His breath fogged the air as he walked, boots crunching through thin ice. He hated how the quiet made space for the past, the shouting, the gunfire, the urgency of saving men he could not save. He rubbed his forehead, as if pressure alone could keep images away. Shadow nudged his hand, sensing the shift in Ethan's breathing. "I'm fine," Ethan murmured, though the words had no conviction. As they turned onto a narrow block, Ethan caught movement ahead. A boy walking alone near the entrance of a small convenience store. The boy appeared no older than 10, with a slight frame and a round face reddened by the cold. His hair was light brown, falling messily across his forehead. He wore a thin puffer jacket too small for the season, the kind that suggested hand-me-downs and hurried mornings. This was Riley Bennett, a child with the soft, open expression of someone who had not yet learned to guard himself from the world. Ethan slowed. The boy wasn't the problem. The danger stood behind him. 2 men emerged from the dim alley, their movements sharp, too deliberate for casual loitering. The taller one wore a heavy black coat with the hood pulled low. He had a long, narrow face, and a restless energy, like someone whose nerves had been stretched thin by bad decisions. The shorter man moved with jerky confidence, hands shoved deep into the pockets of his gray jacket. His eyes darted, calculating, hungry. They were not there for conversation. Shadow stiffened, a low growl rising in his throat. Ethan's instincts snapped into focus so fast it made the hairs on his neck rise. "Stay with me," he whispered to Shadow, voice steady from years of combat commands. The shorter man reached into his jacket. Ethan didn't need to see the weapon. He felt the shift in the air, the tightening of the moment, the fracture between safety and violence. Riley froze, feet rooted to the concrete as if the cold had reached inside him. There was no time to think. Ethan tapped Shadow's side twice, a silent command they had practiced in desert heat and jungle rain. Shadow sprinted in a wide arc, circling behind the attackers. Ethan lunged forward, boots slipping slightly on the icy ground. He grabbed Riley by the collar of his jacket, yanking the boy backward with a force that lifted him off his feet. Ethan shoved him behind a metal dumpster where the snow had gathered in thick drifts. The taller man spun around, startled. A flash of metal glinted. The shot cracked through the night like the world splitting open. The bullet hit the brick wall inches from Ethan's head. The impact burst the brick outward into a spray of sharp fragments, tiny burning shards that sliced across Ethan's cheek and forehead. One fragment struck above his left eye with the force of a hammer. Shadow barked, a fierce guttural sound that carried every memory of battlefield survival. Ethan staggered, his vision shimmered, snowflakes smeared into streaks of white. Riley's small voice rose somewhere behind him, thin with terror, but Ethan could not turn toward it. Heat radiated from his left eye, blooming into a darkness that spread too fast. Another shot rang out. Shadow yelped as the bullet skimmed past, grazing his fur. Ethan's legs buckled. He felt the cold of the pavement rush up to meet him. His fingers clawed at the snow, desperate to push himself upright, but the world suddenly tilted sideways. His left eye saw nothing, only a blackness that felt bottomless. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer, slicing through the winter air. Riley was crying. Shadow pressed his body against Ethan's shoulder, trembling but alert, still guarding him to the last moment. Ethan tried to focus on the boy's voice, on the dog's warmth, on anything to anchor him. But the darkness swallowed everything, and he fell. Bikers in the first winter storm, snow clung to the window pane like a thin veil, softening the world outside into shades of white and fading gray. Ethan Walker woke to the steady beep of a monitor and the faint antiseptic scent that every hospital seemed to share. His body felt heavy, anchored by pain and memory. When he tried to open his left eye, darkness pressed back, cold and final. A soft rustle came from his right. Shadow lay curled at the foot of the bed, his black and tan fur brushed clean, but his posture tense. The German shepherd's left ear twitched whenever someone moved outside the room. He had a fresh bandage along his flank, a pink line peeking through the fur where the bullet had grazed him. Even wounded, Shadow held himself like a soldier on duty. Footsteps approached. A woman entered, her face a blend of professionalism and quiet fatigue. This was Dr. Maria Holbrook, a woman in her early 40s with warm brown skin and black hair pulled into a low twist at the nape of her neck. She had sharp cheekbones, softened only by the empathy in her dark eyes. Her posture was straight, steady, a person accustomed to bearing heavy news. Years in trauma wards had carved patience into her voice, and sorrow had brushed faint creases at the corners of her mouth. "Mr. Walker," she said gently, "you're awake." Ethan swallowed. His throat ached, rough and dry. "My eye," he managed. Maria paused before answering, her expression tightening with compassion. "The damage was severe. The fragments tore through delicate structures we couldn't repair. I'm sorry, Ethan. Your left eye cannot be saved." Her voice was soft, but the words were steel. The truth landed in him like a second bullet, slow, deep, irreversible. The world seemed to shift, not just visually, but in the space inside his chest. One more thing he couldn't get back. One more thing taken by violence. Shadow whined softly, lifting his head to rest it against Ethan's leg. Maria stepped aside then, allowing someone else to enter. A large man filled the doorway, tall and broad-shouldered, wrapped in a black leather jacket dusted with melting snow. His beard was thick and russet brown, streaked with early gray. His jaw was square and tense, as if he were holding back words far heavier than his body. This was Logan Bennett, father of the boy Ethan had dragged behind the dumpster. Logan walked in with slow, heavy steps. His boots made soft thuds on the linoleum floor. Up close, his face held a rugged strength, marked by weather and hard years. A thin scar ran from his right eyebrow to the edge of his cheek. An old wound, the kind a man receives not from carelessness, but from a life lived at the edge of loyalty and danger. His eyes, a clear hazel, revealed the truth beneath the rough exterior: fear, gratitude, and a guilt that gnawed at him. Behind Logan, several figures hovered in the hallway, bikers dressed in leather and denim, their jackets painted with the unmistakable insignia of Hell's Angels. Their silhouettes were imposing, but there was no hostility in their stance, only worry. Among them stood Alex Shaw, a woman in her mid-30s with short auburn hair tucked behind one ear. She was tall and lean, wearing a forest green flannel under her biker vest. Freckles dusted her pale cheeks, and her eyes were a stormy blue, sharp enough to read people in one glance. She had a protective air, the kind born from growing up around men twice her size and learning how to keep her ground. Alex had been the one holding Riley after the gunshots, the one who shielded the boy with her own body. Logan cleared his throat, rough and uneven. "Ethan, I don't have the words," he said. "You saved my son. Riley is alive because of you, one eye or your whole life. We owe you more than we could ever repay." Ethan's jaw tightened. Compliments always felt like another weight to carry. He looked away, staring at the sterile wall rather than the emotion in Logan's gaze. "I didn't do it for repayment," Ethan said quietly. "I know," Logan answered. "That makes it mean even more." Alex stepped closer, her expression gentler than her sharp features suggested. "Riley keeps asking about you," she said. "He was shaking so hard after the shots. But when he heard you were alive, he wouldn't stop crying. Relief, mostly." Ethan closed his eyes, the right one blinking slow and heavy. "What about the men?" he asked. "Gone before the cops arrived," Alex replied. "But that's not your burden right now." Shadow shifted, lifting himself onto his elbows. Maria knelt to check the bandage on his side, her movements practiced and calm. "Shadow's going to be fine," she said. "He took a graze, nothing more." Ethan exhaled shakily, something fragile easing in his chest. Logan moved closer to the bed. "We're not leaving you like this," he said, voice low but steady. "My club, we take care of our own. Today that includes you." Ethan frowned. "I'm not—" "You are," Alex cut in. "You saved a child. That's family to us." The word struck Ethan harder than the recoil of any rifle. Family. He had not heard the word directed at him with sincerity in a long time. Not since before the mission that went wrong. Not since before the friends he trusted were lowered into the ground. He looked toward Shadow, who met his gaze with unwavering loyalty. Maybe it wasn't weakness to let someone help. The snow outside thickened, the storm building like a new beginning. Ethan felt the darkness in his left eye, cold and permanent. But for the first time since the alley, something steadier than fear took root in him. He wasn't alone. Not tonight. Not anymore. The first home after war, the winter sky lay heavy over the outskirts of Seattle, its pale light filtering through tall evergreens coated in white. The clubhouse sat at the end of a narrow road, its wooden beams darkened by years of rain, wind, and the weight of biker footsteps. Above the adjacent storage loft, a small room waited, a place that did not yet feel like Ethan's, but one he had no choice except to call home. Logan Bennett led Ethan up the narrow staircase, each step creaking beneath their weight. Logan walked with a natural authority, his broad frame filling the stairwell. Snow flecked his beard, and his breath puffed in short clouds from the cold. Though his face was rugged, his movements carried a surprising gentleness, shaped by a life where loyalty meant something earned, not spoken. Shadow followed behind, moving slower than usual. His bandaged flank brushed Ethan's leg, and the slight limp in his back leg reminded Ethan of the graze wound the dog had endured. Shadow's coat had been brushed clean by the clinic staff, though his right ear bent forward more than before, giving him a look both noble and enduring. At the top of the stairs, Logan pushed open a wooden door. Inside lay a small room with slanted ceilings, a single bed, a dresser, and a window overlooking the snow-draped forest. A soft golden glow came from a lamp placed on the nightstand, casting warmth into the otherwise sparse space. The faint hum of a heater filled the silence. "It's not fancy," Logan said, rubbing the back of his neck, "but it's safe, warm, and yours." Ethan nodded, though the word yours lodged somewhere deep inside him. He had not possessed anything that resembled a home since before the Navy, and even then it had been temporary. He set his duffel bag down slowly, as if unsure it was allowed to rest there. Shadow sniffed the room, his tail sweeping the air with cautious approval. "Thank you," Ethan said quietly. Logan gave a single nod, firm, sincere, and stepped back toward the door. "If you need anything, holler. Someone's always close." When he left, the silence settled with a weight Ethan wasn't prepared for. He sat on the edge of the bed. The springs dipped beneath him. The mattress gave an unfamiliar softness. Shadow climbed beside him, resting his head on Ethan's thigh. The warmth of the dog grounded him more than the room ever could, but the weight of his missing eye returned quickly. The uneven depth of the room, the blind spot to his left, the way the world tilted whenever he shifted, all of it twisted into a sense of failure he had carried since his discharge. He lifted his hand to the bandage. Beneath it lay a hollow he did not yet have the courage to acknowledge. A soft knock broke the stillness. The door opened and Alex Shaw appeared, carrying a small metal container. She wore a long wool coat over her biker vest, her auburn hair wind-tossed from the cold. Her face held the kind of sharp beauty shaped not by softness, but by grit, by seasons of riding through storms and refusing to be moved. Her eyes, clear blue like glacial water, softened when they landed on Ethan. "Thought you could use a hot meal," she said. "Clubhouse chili. Carl made it, which means it'll burn your soul, but in a good way." She set the container on the small table by the window. The lamp's glow caught the freckles across her cheeks, giving her a gentler look than the leather and cold suggested. Alex had always been the type who carried both fierceness and kindness as if they weighed the same. Ethan managed a small, tired smile. "Thank you." Shadow trotted over to her, tail wagging. Alex crouched and scratched behind his good ear. "How's the warrior doing?" she asked softly. "He'll be fine," Ethan said. "Faster than me, probably." Alex stood, placing her hands in her coat pockets, weight shifting to one leg. "You don't have to prove anything tonight," she said. "Rest, eat, heal, one step at a time." Before Ethan could reply, quick footsteps sounded on the stairs. The door swung open and Riley Bennett appeared, bundled in a bright red jacket that was too large for him. His brown hair stuck out from under a wool hat, and his cheeks were flushed from running in the cold. He carried a sheet of paper, clutched carefully at the corners like something precious. "Ethan!" Riley blurted, nearly tripping over Shadow, who immediately moved aside with surprising patience. Alex gently steadied the boy. "Slow down, kid." "I made you something," Riley said, breathless. He held out the drawing. Ethan took it carefully. It showed him and Shadow standing in a storm of snow. Ethan was drawn tall, with a dark patch over his left eye, while Shadow stood beside him, fur bristling like a sentinel. Above them, in shaky handwriting, the words read, "You can't disappear." Ethan stared at the drawing. His throat tightened so sharply, he had to inhale slowly to keep steady. His hand trembled, just enough for Riley to notice. "It's okay if you don't like it," the boy said softly, shifting his weight. "I'm not good at drawing hands yet." Ethan blinked hard. "No, it's good. It's really good." Riley's smile grew wide, bright as a lantern. For a moment, Ethan felt something he had not felt in years, something fragile and unsettling, the warmth of being seen. Alex watched him quietly, her expression unreadable but soft around the edges. "Tomorrow," she said, "I'll bring extra blankets. It gets cold up here at night." Riley nodded vigorously. "And I'll bring more drawings," Shadow barked in agreement. Ethan held the drawing against his chest, not trusting himself to speak. The storm outside thickened, brushing snow against the window like soft fingertips. And for the first time since leaving the military, Ethan let the warmth of a small room, a loyal dog, and the presence of people who cared settle into the empty spaces inside him. Tonight, he was not a soldier. He was simply a man offered shelter, a man allowed to rest. When a soldier and his dog found their faith again, the winter deepened in the outskirts of Seattle, settling over rooftops and pine branches like layers of quiet resolve. The days were short, the nights sharp with frost, and the club's garage, an old brick building with steel-framed windows, glowed from within like a furnace against the cold. For Ethan Walker, it became the first place since the Navy where he felt his hands were meant to work again. The garage belonged to Frank Dalton, a broad man in his late 40s with sun-leathered skin and a perpetual grease stain on his cheek. Frank sported a dark beard threaded with silver, trimmed neatly but thick around his jaw. His shoulders were hulking, built from years of lifting engines and tools heavier than most men could handle. Though imposing, Frank's personality held a surprising warmth. He was patient, methodical, and had the quiet habit of whistling old country tunes while he worked. The scar across his knuckles hinted at a rough youth, one he rarely spoke of, except to say he had survived it because someone once refused to give up on him. That small truth shaped the way he treated Ethan, firm but believing. Ethan began with simple tasks, organizing tools, cleaning workbenches, tightening bolts on the club's motorcycles. With one functioning eye, the depth perception was an ongoing battle. He'd reach too short or too far, sometimes knocking a wrench off the table. Frank never scolded. He would place a gentle but steady hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Slow and steady. You're relearning the world, son. That takes time." Shadow stayed nearby each day, stretched out beside the workbench like a sentinel. His bandaged flank had healed into a faint line beneath his fur. The dog's amber eyes followed Ethan with soft vigilance, rising to attention whenever someone unfamiliar entered the garage. Members often paused to greet him. Shadow accepted their affection with regal patience. as if understanding that this place, this brotherhood, was becoming his home too. Logan Bennett visited the garage from time to time. His heavy boots echoed against the concrete as he inspected the rows of bikes, his hazel eyes lingering on Ethan with a mix of pride and concern. Logan had always carried himself like a man who feared losing the things he cared about. The world had taken too much from him already: his father in a construction accident, his first best friend to a gang fight, and nearly, so painfully nearly, his son Riley to the alleyway gunman. Seeing Ethan alive and working seemed to restore something inside him. One evening, as the winter light faded into violet dusk, Logan called for a full club meeting. Members gathered in the main hall of the clubhouse, a room filled with banners, maps, and photographs dating back decades. The air buzzed with murmured conversation as men and women shrugged off jackets and settled into their seats. Ethan stood near the back, Shadow sitting, tall at his side like carved stone. Logan stepped to the front. His beard caught the lamplight, framing the stern seriousness in his expression. Alex Shaw stood to his right, arms crossed, her stormy blue eyes trained on the room. Frank Dalton leaned against a pillar, nodding for Ethan to come closer. When the room quieted, Logan lifted a small patch between two fingers. It was rectangular, embroidered in black and white. Under protection, Hell's Angels, for a heartbeat, the room seemed to hold its breath. "Brothers and sisters," Logan began, voice deep and resonant, "this soldier and his dog put themselves between death and my suit. They did it without hesitation, without knowing who we were, and without expecting anything in return." He looked at Ethan, his gaze unwavering. That kind of courage, that kind of heart, you don't see it every day. Ethan shifted, uncomfortable under the spotlight. Shadow pressed against his leg, grounding him. Logan continued, "Ethan Walker and Shadow have fought for others their whole lives. It's time someone fought for them." He extended the patch toward Ethan. "This means you're under our protection. This means you're family." The room remained silent, not out of doubt, but out of respect. Eyes watched Ethan, some soft with welcome, others shining with understanding. Ethan stepped forward slowly. The patch trembled slightly as he took it. His fingers brushed the fabric, feeling the rough stitchwork, the weight it symbolized. He swallowed hard. Joining a family, even partially, felt like stepping into a warm room after years in the cold. Ethan began, voice uneven. "I don't know what to say." Frank grinned behind his beard. "You don't have to say anything, kid." Alex smirked softly. "Just don't disappear on us." Shadow wagged his tail once, the soft thump against Ethan's boot echoing through the hall like quiet approval. Ethan bowed his head, not in submission, but in gratitude deeper than words. "Thank you," he whispered. The room filled with nods, murmurs, and a rising warmth. A few members slapped Ethan gently on the back. One of the older bikers, Marlene Briggs, a woman in her 60s with silver curls and a leather vest patched with decades of history, stepped forward. Her dark brown skin was marked with age and laughter. She placed a firm hand on Ethan's arm. "You've earned your place," she said. "Took me years to get my patch. You got hard enough for 10 men." Ethan managed a weak but genuine smile, and for the first time since the battlefield, he felt the world shift, ever so slightly, from survival to belonging. Shadow nudged his leg again, as if sensing the transformation. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the clubhouse in winter's quiet blessing. And within those walls, a soldier and his dog found something that neither had expected to receive again, a family willing to fight for them. The child from Seattle and the one-eyed hero. The winter sun hung low over Seattle, filtered through layers of soft gray cloud that muted the city into quiet colors. In a small community center on the north side, the air held the faint smell of old books and radiator heat. Folding chairs lined the room in careful rows. On the far wall, a mural of evergreen trees stretched toward a painted horizon, a hopeful forest, rising despite the weight of sky. Ethan Walker stood at the front, feeling the familiar mixture of steadiness and unease that came before he spoke. He wore a simple dark sweater, sleeves pushed to his elbows. His face had changed over the past year, not hardened, but opened. The jagged scar near his jaw had softened into something less like a wound and more like a story. His left eye, now replaced with a realistic prosthetic of a muted hazel, remained still beneath the lid. His right eye carried the warmth and depth of a man who had survived more than most should. Shadow lay at his feet, now fully healed. The German shepherd's coat shone with winter light, his ears alert but relaxed. Time had mellowed him slightly, but not his sense of duty. He watched the children in the room with calm intelligence, tail sweeping the floor and with slow contentment. The teenagers, around 30 of them, shifted in their chairs, some slouching, some leaning forward with expectation. Most were between 12 and 17, dressed in layered jackets and worn sneakers, carrying that mixture of bravado and vulnerability that youth carried like a shield. Near the front sat a volunteer named Sarah Whitmore, a woman in her early 30s with gentle features framed by shoulder-length blonde hair. Her skin was pale with a dusting of freckles that peeked from beneath minimal makeup. Tall and slender, she moved with an easy grace and carried a quiet determination. Sarah had spent years working with at-risk youth after losing a younger brother to street violence. That loss shaped the grief-tinged kindness in her gray-blue eyes. She greeted Ethan with a small nod of encouragement. Ethan took a breath. "My name is Ethan Walker," he began, voice steady, "and a few years ago, I thought the only thing left in my life was survival." The room hushed. Even the restless boys in the back stilled slightly. He told them about the Navy, about missions carried out in silence beneath foreign skies, about the explosion that ended his career and stole pieces of himself he had never recovered. He spoke of wandering after discharge, lost between a world he no longer belonged to and one he no longer understood. Then he told them about the storm, the alley, the boy. Riley Bennett, 10 years old, terrified, caught between two armed men in the cold. He told them how he ran toward the danger, not because he felt brave, but because something inside him refused to let a child fall. He told them of the bullet that shattered the brick wall and his vision, and of Shadow fighting at his side even in the dark. Some of the teens stared with wide eyes. Others dropped their gazes, absorbing the weight of a life cracked open and rebuilt. Ethan paused, swallowing softly, and said, "Losing my eye wasn't the hardest part. The hardest part was believing I still had a place in the world." A chair scraped quietly. Someone sniffled. At the door, several bikers stood silently, Logan Bennett among them. Today, Logan wore a heavy coat lined with shearling, the collar turned up around his strong, weather-worn face. His beard was dusted with snow, and his hazel eyes softened whenever they landed on Ethan. Behind him stood Alex Shaw, arms tucked across her chest, auburn hair tucked under a knitted beanie. Frank Dalton leaned against the wall, wide as a refrigerator in his dark jacket, his beard moving when he shifted uncomfortably in the too small hallway. But none of them spoke. They let Ethan hold the room. When he finished recounting the moment he lost consciousness in the snow, he let silence sit for a heartbeat before speaking again. "I thought I was alone," he said, "but I wasn't. People I'd never met chose to stand beside me. My life didn't get rebuilt because I'm strong. It got rebuilt because I let people help me." A stir came from the front row. Riley Bennett, now 11 and noticeably taller, stood up. His brown hair was neater these days, and confidence settled on his shoulders like a well-worn jacket. He crossed the small space and wrapped his arms firmly around Ethan's waist. The embrace was simple, but something inside Ethan cracked open gently, like thawing ice giving way to spring water. Shadow lifted his head and huffed approvingly. Behind Riley, Logan bowed his head, emotion tightening the set of his jaw. The other bikers softened too, forming an unspoken circle around the moment, steel and leather wrapped around tenderness. Ethan placed a steady hand on Riley's back. Then he addressed the room again. "Not everyone who saves someone else is the strongest," he said quietly. "Sometimes, they're the ones trying their hardest not to disappear." Sarah brushed a tear from her cheek. Several teens mirrored the gesture. Shadow let out a soft bark, as if underlining the truth. Outside, winter flakes drifted past the window, each one falling with a softness that felt like forgiveness. And in the warmth of the modest room, Ethan felt something rise in him, slow, bright, steady, the warmth of belonging, the warmth of being seen, the warmth of being allowed to begin again. There are moments in life when darkness feels too heavy, when loss closes a door we never wanted to walk through. But sometimes, in the quiet of our hardest nights, God sends a spark we did not expect, a person, a gesture, a second chance that feels almost like a miracle placed gently in our path. Ethan never asked for a blessing. He never prayed for a new beginning. Yet grace found him anyway, in the shape of a child he saved, a loyal dog who refused to leave his side, and a family built from leather jackets and battered hearts. Some miracles arrive softly, some arrive through the arms that lift us when we fall, and some arrive through the people who remind us that God has not forgotten our name. In our daily lives, these moments still happen. A kind word at the right time, a stranger who stops to help, a friend who calls when sorrow sits too long on the porch. These are not accidents. These are reminders that heaven still leans close to the earth, watching, guiding, whispering hope into the cracks of our days. If this story touched your heart, please share it, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel so more people can find a little light in the middle of their winter. May God bless every person watching. May He walk beside you in your quiet hours, and may He place His hand gently over your life, the way He once placed it over Ethan's, turning brokenness into purpose and loneliness into a home. Amen.